Hey guys, Damian here. As I continue to interview the top MSPs in the world, one thing has become incredibly clear. It's time that we let go. Even more than that, every time I focus on my zone of genius and get out of the way and do the very few things I'm good at and delegate to others, I'm ready for that next level of growth. One way that I could help you is with Servosity. We co-manage your backups and disaster recovery so you can focus on what you do best, let us do the rest. And then what we do is we test the backups every single day so you never have to worry. If you'd like to engage us or just learn more, click the link below.
The word family was used quite a bit. I had to say, guys, you will never hear the word family from me. We're not a family. I'm sorry, never confuse that. You're not the crazy Uncle Joe at the Thanksgiving table that's going to always get drunk and blabber away and bring political discussions and create friction. We're a high-performing team, and I would rather use that construct, which is we're going to work together, we're going to design plays, you have a role to play in those plays, and if you're not executing, then we'll do coaching around those things, and if you're not responding to coaching, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be it, right? And so that's the big difference is we're not a family, we're a high-performing team.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset, founder and CEO of Servosity. Today, I'm blessed to interview Sumeet Sabharwal. Now, I know some of you MSPs, you're thinking, hey, if my competitor gets bought by private equity, that's wonderful. They're going to cut costs, they're going to deliver poor service, and maybe I'll even pick up a key employee. Until you meet somebody like Sumeet, who has increased headcount, who has decided that they're going to niche in not only the vertical, but in public cloud, and even go to the time and expense to build their own security operations center within their company. Now, if you want to learn how he did that and built a culture that is second to none that propelled them to number 11 on the top MSP list, don't miss out on my conversation with Sumeet today. So, Sumeet, you've got a really interesting story. Take me back to how you joined and what happened in 2020. Obviously COVID, but what happened with your businesses and how they came together.
Sure, would love to, Damian, and thank you for having me here. It's truly a pleasure to rejoin you, and I'm a big fan of the work you're doing. It's tremendous, and so thank you again for sort of bringing MSPs together. And I always find great wisdom in a lot of the podcasts that you put together. So my story, I've been blessed, Damian, for 32 plus years to be on this side of the equation, i.e. the service provider side, right? And for me, I have truly enjoyed that because I feel like back then, if I rewind back to 32 years, the movie had a similar plot that it does today, which is technology was disrupting business. As you're a young guy, but we had the whole Y2K and digitization and the client server to web, and everybody thought that was the God's greatest gift. And, all of the dot-com boom happened and the bust happened right after. But, there was a huge opportunity to take traditional businesses and rewire a lot of how they were working and, ERP, supply chain, and all those buzzwords. And so I, joined consulting at that wave. And so it was tremendous, right, to be able to work on this side and extract the signal from the noise, work to digitize businesses, set up web storefronts, really enable the whole online experience that was sort of something new and a novelty. Fast forward that into the cloud. And then, I had the pleasure of leading a business that was a digital infrastructure thing, data centers, pivot that into more of managed services, both private cloud. We built our own multi-tenant private cloud, and then increasingly managed services on public cloud, especially Azure. So it was great to take that business across 15 years of working there through really 3 different paradigm shifts, and eventually accelerate the public cloud business and have a 40+% growth business. We eventually sold that business in 2019 to Madison Dearborn. And I told my wife, and I still remember this was August of 2019, and I told my wife, hey, I'm taking a year off. I have a long bucket list, and top of the bucket list is heli skiing. And so, to heli ski means you have to be a very good skier. So I said, hey, I'm going. I've got my tickets already. I'm going to go. I'm going to be a ski bum starting December. I'm going to spend 2 or 3 months in Utah. And so I love Alta, by the way. And I'm just going to, I'm going to get some private lessons and, I'll see you when I see you. And she was like, December. She kept saying December. This was August. I said, what do you mean December? She's like, you'll be back at work in December. I said, why? She's like, you don't know how restless you get without a purpose in mind. And to her credit, in December, I was writing a thesis for my next thing. And so it was a 6-slide thesis that I still go back to today, which is, hey, there's tremendous opportunity in the lower mid-market segment, but it needs to be addressed with very vertically specific use cases as an MSP, and bringing the hosting and application worlds together, abstracting that complexity, delivering it as a service, really playing at the intersection of economies of scale and economies of expertise. So that 6-slide thesis, and I live in Boston, and I'm blessed that a lot of the private equity funds that firms that invest in services, be it BB, be it MC, be it Avery, are all here. And so they were all very kind and generous with their time and, sort of exploring opportunities in their portfolio, but they were also very generous with their contacts. And so I still remember walking out of one meeting in Jan, and I had, within 2 hours, 32 emails out to different private equity firms with the person introducing me and saying, hey, you need to talk to Sumeet. He's got a great thesis. One of those ended up being, our current sponsor, BluffPoint. And so I walk in, and they already had a platform investment in a healthcare managed services provider, and they had done an acquisition on the legal side as well. And, it was like music to their ears in terms of what I'm walking through. And they turned around and said, hey, would you like to come and operate this venture? And so I jumped both feet in. And that's sort of a little bit of the backdrop to the story in terms of walking in. So we had a healthcare focused MSP, and we just acquired a legal MSP as well that we hadn't quite integrated, but was languishing on the side. So that's where the journey started. I think part of it was very apparent to me, like, we had a talent deficit in certain areas, and we're in a talent game. And so number one priority was shoring up talent and really shoring up the client experience. It was a owner, to me, the most critical thing, that I always advise private equity, and certainly sort of, is that whole owner to operator transition, right? You could write a whole book on it. And I think if you were to write a book in our context, everything that could go wrong had gone wrong already. And so rebuilding trust, right? Stemming some of the exit of talent, rebuilding the client experience really took the bulk of the first, I would say, year and a half. Along the way, it was very clear that discipline was the key thing. I would go talk to our sellers, and, I would ask them, what do we do? And who do we do it for? And what's our target audience? And I would get different answers. And I was like, well, that's a problem, right? We're clearly not aligned. And so rebuilding a very cohesive go-to-market, and it's never said and done, right? It's about the discipline of saying, how do we then get everyone to not just align on it, nod their heads, but operationalize it, became that journey. And part of what we've done is really embrace ABM, or account-based marketing, and really bring that discipline to say, not just who's our target audience, which is, hey, look, guess what? In the legal sector, our target audience is firms that are 25 to 150 employees. That's still a huge market. Okay, we've got 4 reps, so how do we further skinny it? Oh, we're going to go after these 9 markets. Great. In these 9 markets, then how do we further drill it down? These are our prospects. Let's go create a module of 80 to 100 accounts. Let's go map that module. So it's not about throwing darts on a board, but really creating accountability, but also creating that supporting infrastructure, channelizing our marketing dollars to warm up and generate, our sort of mind share within those prospects. So I'm a big, big believer, Damian, in focus, right? Number one, not being everything to everyone, right? Defining our market, but then also making sure that we're being very targeted and pinpoint in a world where analytics and data and intelligence, need to be leveraged very actively, right? I always say you can go figure out what I had for dinner 2 days ago because probably that data has been sold in some market and they know all my preferences. We've got to be using that data to our advantage to understand where our buyers are, how our buyers are linking, and fundamentally educate, right? Which is, it's not about selling, it's about education. They will come to you. If we educate them and then we deliver a great client experience, the business is going to grow. And that's been, the reflection in our growth rates. Our legal business, has grown 24% year over year. Our accounting business has grown 36%, and that's something that, again, is a reflection of bringing a lot of focus, bringing a lot of discipline into how we see the world and how we go to market. Sorry, long story, long answer to your question.
No, there's so much to unpack there. So if I understand, you came in and was COVID starting to happen or just about to happen when you were was starting here?
I was lucky in the sense that COVID happened a week later is when the world went remote. So I started and I had 1 week of spending quality time with my key leaders and having some in-person interaction before everything pivoted to a remote model. And we were scratching our heads and trying to kind of figure out the playbook. And I still go back and laugh at the communication because we were like, oh, we're going to open the office in the next 3 months. We kept shifting the date for when we were going to open offices to a point where the communication was, we don't know when we're going to open the office, if ever. But it was really funny to now go back and read that, communication and how that tone kept changing as we were getting 6 months, 8 months into that whole pandemic period of working.
I remember that very vividly. Like, what a few weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks.
We all thought it would tide over, and they're like, well, it's going to be around the corner. It's around the corner.
That's right.
And then eventually we said, we had 4 different offices, Damian, then, and we, what dawned on me 6 months into it was we weren't using our real estate, wisely, and so a lot of it was, let's start to create a plan to exit most of these offices, right? With the realization that life's not going to go back to, the pendulum's not going to swing back automatically. There's some middle ground, but clearly we're not going to need as much office space. And so we reduced our office footprint and redirected some of that money into, employee, investment, both in terms of, hey, we want to pay people to get certified. Go get certified. Learn. We want to invest in your learning and education. We want to do more social happy hours. That also that's always pulling people away from families. And so, but we've tried to do various things to invest some of that money back into our employees in a more direct manner as we think about sort of talent and the fact that, we're squarely in the talent business.
Mm. So being in the talent business, I'm curious, how did you deal with a week before COVID? Then all of a sudden everybody's remote and you had 2 businesses, maybe not even integrated yet. And now, now you're at the helm. Now you've got to make sense of talent and strategy and working remote and growth. And it's hard enough to come into a new business, let alone 2 new businesses essentially. And then working remote and COVID all at the same time. Like how did you and your leadership team try to make sense of things at the beginning?
Yeah, I think, look, I always say culture and competence is always a top-down exercise, right? Trying to do it as a bottom-up is an exercise in folly. And so for me, a lot of the initial core focus was, do I have the right team? Do they share my values, right? And my values are ones where I'm very open, right? It's radical but constructive candor, right? It's like if there's a meeting after the meeting, I think we have a problem, and some of that was happening, and so okay, that's a cultural issue. Two is, really I'm very hands-on, and I always say we're a small company. It's like all our job descriptions, you'll laugh, start with a hands-on leader, right? And the hands-on word is probably mentioned 6 different times. If I'm hiring you and you need to hire someone to do your job, I'm sorry, we've got the wrong person. You've got somebody who still goes and, works with our sales reps on proposals, on structuring things without taking ownership away, but telling them I'm in the trenches with them, right? I truly try to model that servant leader mindset and be in the trenches and be in the operation. So, the culture of, hey, guess what? Everyone's hands-on. Everyone's a doer, right? I mean, there's, and you need to be a player coach in a smaller organization. Intellectually curious. You need to have a growth mindset, right? The world around us is changing. And so tell me what you learned yesterday. Tell me what you learned 6 years ago. I'll tell you a great example. Our CFO, who really models that intellectual curiosity, and it's a pleasure to work with him. I mean, we were trying to drive a certification initiative, and he got certified in Azure. Now, you can imagine a CFO of a company saying, I have an Azure certification, but because he had an Azure certification, he started looking at the Azure bills at a line item level, starting to understand some of the things and starting to ask them questions with our team. And guess what? We have unlocked additional savings because of that curiosity factor. And so always give that as an example of, in a world where you blink and, the public cloud, both Google, Azure, and AWS have launched 40 new services. You have to really stay very curious. And what's happening around AI, and we'll touch that on some point. But I think starting to look at how technology applies to you and to the world around you, and what is your role is again a key and core trait. So going back to, did I have the right team? And so part of it was, do they share my values? And guess some of them did share my values. And so the first part of the journey, Damian, for me was transforming that core leadership team that I had, starting with the core value test and, sort of saying which ones didn't meet the test that needed to be exited, right? Because there are certain things, guess what? If you lack it, I am not here to teach you basics. Either you have it or you don't. And if you don't have it, then this is the wrong place for you. So I would say a good, first 9 months was restructuring the leadership team, rebuilding that, plugging holes in that, bringing new leaders on board that really shared my values. And so getting to a place, fast forward a year later, where I felt like I had a great leadership team. We were all cohesive, and along the way, spending a lot of time building alignment. So we still bring my lead team together every quarter and spend 3 or 4 days together. And I call those sessions align. Align because, Damian, my job is I am not the smartest guy in the room, nor do I want to be. But I want to make sure the left and the right are aligned. I want to make sure, hey, what we're doing from a marketing perspective and what my vertical leader in legal is thinking about, right, are cohesive and interlocked, and we use big rocks and elements of EOS, and so making sure we're knitting together our strategy with a solid execution plan, and everyone has clear understanding of what success in a quarterly context and annual context looks like, right down to what those big rocks are and how they tie together. That's a lot of that execution discipline that we've kind of built up, that now 4.5 years later has kind of become muscle memory in the company. So now the next level down was, okay, now after that was, okay, we've got a great core team. They're aligned. We're now starting to hum and sing in the same direction. The next thing is the mid-level managers. And how do we then build the right team? How do we give them the tools of the trade? How do we deal with a lot of what had taken place, which is the Peter principle, right? Nothing wrong, but in a owner-led model, right? There were a few things that were used that I'm never in a big favor of, and sort of undoing that really was having some tough conversations. One was the word family was used quite a bit, And I had to say, guys, you will never hear the word family from me. We're not a family. I'm sorry. Never confuse that. You're not the crazy Uncle Joe at the Thanksgiving table that's going to always get drunk and blabber away and bring political discussions and create, and create friction. We're a high performing team, and I would rather use that construct, which is, we're going to work together. We're going to design plays. You have a role to play in those plays. And if you're not executing, then we'll do coaching around those things. And if you're not responding to coaching, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be it, right? And so that's the big difference is we're not a family. We're a high performing team. And so it's a very hard concept, very, very hard concept, Damian, for folks who have operated in owner-led environments to always understand. Now, some transcend that boundary, some don't, right? They're used to, guess what? The owner used to, embrace every sin of mine, and we used to have barbecues and picnics and other things together, and, we used to go to the church together. And that's fine, but that's not what we're here for, right? So that piece, meant change and transformation from a talent perspective. That also meant bringing a generation. And the second thing was the Peter Principle. People being promoted just because they were competent didn't mean that they always had the managerial skills, right? So, now the distinction between how to manage close friends, right, and hold performance and accountability was, always a gray area. And so that next layer of transformation, which is still, I would say, very much of a journey, was sort of the second phase of the exercise, right? To be able to say, look, we have to have the right managers, and we have to give them the tools of the trade and the coaching, and then have them drive accountability with their teams and how we think about measurement and metrics, right? So I think, long answer to your question, in a remote world, measuring and building a cohesive set of metrics that tie operationally to what we're trying to achieve becomes even more important and paramount, right? So to be able to say, that's great, you want to work remotely, but there has to be some level of accountability around the performance of the business, and we need to have some way to measure it, as simple as how quickly chats are being answered, how quickly calls are being answered. What is that, sort of measures of quote unquote productivity, which is often viewed as a dirty term with employees. And so that's why I say it with air quotes, right? But it's productivity, not necessarily in the context of, negative context of operational efficiency at a labor. It's a positive context of what causes friction and how do we remove friction? How do we automate that? That's one of the big things we're looking to launch as we go into 2025. That has me very excited is, a program within our company called a Net Better program, which is like, hey, I will personally shepherd this, bring ideas forward. If your idea is accepted, right, and we're building a cross-functional team across the company that's going to look at all those ideas with me, and, ideas that deem merit, that are accepted, we're going to roll out financial incentives, right, because that makes the company better, that makes the lives of our employees better, and that makes eventually the lives of our clients better, right? So that Net Better program, which is the intelligence is always there at the front lines. How do you not be the general that's in a bunker post, right, disconnected from the front lines, is the big thing I always think about, which is like, how do I really get a pulse of what's happening on the front lines in a scalable, efficient manner? And then how do I take those data points and action them and channel them in a manner that becomes a self-fulfilling, virtuous, positive cycle?
Yeah, there's so much more to unpack there. I want to go back to one thing you said, which is referring to it as a family. And I remember making that mistake, even as a founder, because the reality is our mission is to take care of our clients and to take care of our team. And if you become that crazy Uncle Joe, like you were talking about, and if you're unwilling to be coached, if you're unwilling to help, then you're jeopardizing the mission for the rest of our team, for our clients. So I felt like I wanted to say family when it helped, and I didn't want to say it when it hurt. And so I realized like that's the wrong metaphor, right? It is much more like a professional team where, you can't always show up when you're going to act like crazy Uncle Joe, right? You have to you have to show up and help the mission. And I think, people get it because they're working really hard. And if you were jeopardizing their ability to achieve their goals and their mission, they do want you off the bus. And so, nobody likes to talk about, we want to hire the right people and get the right culture. But the truth is, unlike family, we have to move the right people off the bus, which I think is at least as important as being careful about who we allow on the bus.
Absolutely. And, the metaphor I always use, Damian, is, with our employees, get on the bus, get off the bus. Please, with folded hands, please don't hang off the side of the bus. It's not good for you. It's not good for the company, right? And right. So that, whether you call it quiet quitting or, hanging off the side of the bus, I had to deal with a lot of that in the first 2 years, right? There were a lot of people who were just, this is a very abrupt change. And, it's like my first all hands, when I, really distanced myself from the word family, offended a lot of people. I was very chastised after the fact, and a lot of people unfortunately chose to because, I guess it was easier to hide in a remote model too, but chose to be more passive about it. And so a lot of that journey is, look, you've got a career to build, right? You've got kids to feed. I'm open to feedback. We all are open to feedback. But if this is not the right place, then this is not the right place. If it is, then let's go do great things together, right? And so dealing with the people who hang off the side of the bus was also, a big part of that journey in transforming the culture and getting it much more into, operator-led culture. But operator-led culture is often got the negative connotations. The private equity culture has often got the negative connotations, right? And I always say, look, it doesn't have to be, right? And culture is always shaped in the smallest of actions and the smallest of behaviors. And I'll tell you a few things. I walked in and there was vernacular matters and, what do we call the core leadership team? We call them the executive leadership team. I was like, guys, I don't know who the executive is. It ain't me. It ain't you. If you think you're an executive, go work somewhere else because, I hate that term. You're never going to hear the term executive from me. And so banishing that and saying, I know I've got an executive in my title, but let's kind of that aside, right? We're elite team. Let's just call it that, right? And guess what? The best leaders I've seen are on the front lines, right? Let's not confuse, title with authority and with impact. And so getting that vernacular change itself was a big part of it. Second part of the vernacular, which I still get, worked up about is I said, I don't know who you're talking about as a customer. AT&T has customers. We have clients, right? So have you go walk into a law firm or a CPA firm, they will never call their clients customers, right? So, we're dealing with, white glove service. We want to go above and beyond. And so reframing that vernacular in a lot of different dimensions became equally key in reshaping that narrative internally. So, just little things like extraordinarily focused on two things from day one. One, recognizing the small things and celebrating the small wins. I always feel like, it's like positive culture, positive energy comes from small actions, right? Become not always the big ones. People often will remember a handwritten note more than $1,000 incentive you send them, right? And 10 years from now, what's recall like and what impacts hearts, minds, and emotions. So I'm a big believer in celebrating the small wins. My weekly core lead team call, Damian, always starts with the first thing on the agenda is aha moments. Tell me, let's go around as a team. What caught your attention? What is something our employees did? What's something our clients said about, our impact that caught your attention, right? And then I take notes and then I follow up and then I'll reach out to employees and I'll say, hey, I heard that we, prevented a disaster going into the weekend because we were able to, proactively identify, the patching window was incorrect and take corrective actions. And I realized you had to come in on a Saturday to do that. I heard the story and I just was thrilled about it. Right. So those little things, to me shape the culture and the environment. I said there's 100 reasons why our employees may quit. recognition shouldn't be one of them, right? So let's make sure that we're following through on that. The second is communication, right? In remote work, and the lack of communication means a narrative is being constructed regardless of whether you like it or not. And so how do we communicate? How do we have information flow through the organization? So we do monthly all hands. No surprise, the monthly all hands start. What's the first thing in the monthly all hands? Putting people on a pedestal, right, who are living our values. We start with talent celebration. We celebrate milestones. We have a big shot recognition, which is who's living our core values. People nominate, this time we had 36 different nominations. Love reading them. It's such a joy to spend a whole hour reading 36 nominations and then getting into a passionate discussion about who should we recognize. It's almost irrelevant who we recognize. You recognize all 36 of them, but you got to put one person on the pedestal. But it's just a joy, right? And then I'll find ways to recognize the others. But that's what I say is that culture is a product of small actions. Like another thing we started doing, which is, hey, guess what? Let's do the hard work of saying what certifications are relevant to us. We created a catalog of all of them, and then we allocated them into tiers of effort. This is small, this is medium, this is large, this is extra large. And then we bracketed a bonus. Guess what? Becoming an Azure architect is the BFD. So let's pay a $5,000 bonus against that. Why won't we, right? How many Azure architects are there? And we're blessed that as a small company, we have so many of them. And people invest time and energy outside of the core work. Of course, we're going to pay all the training and support stuff, but let's give them write a check, right? No strings attached, right? Because it shouldn't be that, hey, we're paying a check and now you have to sign a retention agreement. No, well, I think we're doing the right thing. Our employees are going to stay. So again, doing things that align our intention, right? And the desire to shape a culture with the actions. That again becomes an example of that.
So one thing I want to bring up is that there's this perception, I think general, that private equity equals bad/evil. And therefore anybody that they hire, especially to bring in, right? And they bought a couple of companies and then they brought you in to run them, right? So I think, to a lot of people, I don't know about your team, but to a lot of people, right, the private equity is bad and the CEO they bring in is going to be, by bad, I mean, all about the numbers, all about cutting the costs, not investing, not worried about culture, right? Just a lot of those sort of preconceptions. Yet I hear you talking about how do we recognize people, put them on a pedestal? How do I reach out to them as an individual and thank them for what they did on Saturday? How do we give them a bonus with no strings attached? And it doesn't seem like that perception could be true in this case with all the things that you're doing. So how do you see that differently? And I guess how did your team, react? Did they see this from day one as a net positive, or did they have a whole bunch of concerns saying, now there's new leadership and I don't until they knew you, they didn't know you.
So generally speaking, Damian, I always say, look, at the end of the day, right, what is private equity investing in, right? They're investing in value creation, right? Sustained value creation, right? Because anybody can have one lucky year, but, you have to have a sustained value when they look to go sell, recap, right? At the end of a 5-6 year hold period, right? Someone looks at it, they look at the historical numbers. It becomes very hard to sustain value creation, drive double-digit growth rate, drive EBITDA improvement without doing the right things. You can you can fake it for some period of time, but to me, demons in the closet always catch up at some point. And so, if you're not focused on the underlying building blocks of culture, if you're not, think about it, right? We talk about companies that have a great client experience. Zappos was always used as an example. Is that it's because they fundamentally invest in their employees, right? If you go to Trader Joe's as an example, Damian, and they're the most helpful, but they also pay on the higher end of the spectrum, compared to other grocery stores, right? So, and they're not fools if they're also backed by a sponsor, and yet they're paying at the higher end of the spectrum because that's their product, that's their differentiation. So I always say, look, we as operators, right, are tasked with balancing both investing in our employees and delivering returns to our shareholders, right? And what we can't do is punish our employees for poor execution on our end, right? So that's the balance piece, right? Because if you've got a good game plan, if you've got a good execution strategy, you're executing against that in a disciplined manner, you're driving accountability, then you have all the room, I would argue, to do the right things. Now, if you're not, then, you're reacting to it and, cutting corners in a way that is masking the underlying structural issues.
Yeah, well said. Help me book in this. You came in, they had just bought a second managed service provider, and about how many folks full-time were part of the organization?
Yeah, about, at that point was about, I would say about 70 folks. And today we're about 110, right? If you look at we've got some dedicated staff in India that are not, our employees per se. But it's less about the staff, but it's more about operational efficiency and what we've been able to do, right, in driving a disciplined model, and in that manner, both via automation, both via, just better structuring of how work gets done and better placement of that, and just better talent overall, right? The productivity of great talent and their ability to kind of do stuff and get to problems and solve them faster is fundamentally different. So, a lot of the, revenue growth is not linear to the headcount growth story per se. And we're not done, by the way, right? I still say we have plenty of room to become more operationally efficient in the non-labor, not in the labor, but in the non-labor categories of how work flows through the system. That's the whole Net Better program, and getting our frontline employees to say, guess what, why am I dealing with this 6 times every day? And there must be a better way to do, how the monitoring alerts are generated, and, what that's doing, and why am I getting 6 alerts, and why is it not correlating, and why can't we just auto remediate these 6 things that we know are always, the underlying thing is to go provision more resources, right? We could orchestrate that action. So I think there's room to continue to do more of that. And that's sort of the focus as we think about next year, as we continue to grow and scale, is having the revenue scale non-linearly to the headcount piece.
Speaking of scaling, and something you guys did invest early on, I believe. So tell me about the conversation with your CISO, and I think you guys might have considered acquisition of MSSP, but if I understand, all the growth has come organically. And what did that lead you to build internally?
Sure. So for us, it's been, under my tenure over the last 4.5 years, it's been all organic growth. One of the things that early on was very clear to me, especially in the second year as we were going in, interacting with our clients, is that, hey, the MSP and the MSSP value proposition is largely lost on our clients. That's terminology that we understand. But for our clients, we are really the provider that's providing both the infrastructure, the help desk, the managed services, and the security piece. And so we need to expand and extend our competency, and knowing that there's a different level of skill sets and investments involved, right? To be a true MSSP and do it well, we need to look at building those or acquiring those skill sets. So the initial focus, with the sponsorship of our parent private equity firm, was to go acquire. And, there was a good 18-month period between 2021 and 2022 where we looked at a lot of different assets and MSSP players that were tuck-in that we could bring in. And, having done this before, they fell into one of, 2 different categories, right? One was they truly had something meaningful, or 2 were they had a skin on third-party platforms, and they had just aggregated and built a thin veneer of IP. And so, as you dug in, right, you kind of sifted through all of that to say, hey, what are the ones with the true IP? And they had 12 other bidders or 15 other bidders chasing them. The valuation disconnects were just crazy. And so, 18 months into it, I turned around to our CISO, who had been a tremendous partner in this journey. And I said, look, we've done this before in our prior venture. I know it was painful then, but, we've got the playbook. We've got the knowledge. We've got the Rolodex of people and who to call, right? What do you think about getting back in the trenches and rebuilding all of that stuff, which is, that's a lot of effort because you're now hiring. You were building a SOC from a ground up. You were putting a SIM together with a lot of feeds, 25 different integrations across all the different vectors, right? You're building the rules for correlation, and you're training the AI and the data models, and then, you're training your security analysts on how to deal with all of that stuff. So he's like, I've done this before, but you have to be patient, right? And I said, understood. This is not an overnight journey. It'll take some time. I think it took a year to put all of that together, and it took a few months more after that to iron out all the wrinkles and to get it fully operationalized, to have a few clients in there that were, gracious enough to be early adopters, and for us to get to a point where that has become the fastest engine of our growth and a tremendous differentiator. Now, when we look at clients and prospects today, it's really, for me, tremendously gratifying, Damian, to be able to say we're vertically focused, so we understand the problems, right? We're vertically focused on your segment. So you as a 150-person CPA, that's our ideal profile. That's who we cater to. We understand the challenges that you're facing with your CCH applications. We understand how to optimize that in Azure. We understand tax season and busy season and how to staff up and staff down for it. We understand application patching and how critical that is during tax season when updates are published and need to be applied overnight in a small window of 3 hours because CPAs are working 18 hours. And guess what? We've automated all of that. Our systems are built and geared for that. So we can speak the vertical language. 2 is, we operate in public cloud. We've embraced that for our size and scale. We've got, architects, engineers. We live this, FinOps or financial management of resources in Azure, in AWS is a core competency. We watch it like a hawk, and, we built hooks. We have a 40,000 line report that comes from Azure that gets processed via scripts and automation right down to a client level to be able to see where every cent is and why if a cent has changed, why. So it's that level of investment of operating with diligence and excellence in public cloud. That's the second circle. And the third circle is security. And we've now, have truly an integrated security offering that is proactive, that's capturing data across 25 different vectors, that looks at the end user and their behavior and, does user entity behavior analysis to say, why is Damian creating a forwarding rule in Office 365 and forwarding all his emails to Gmail? That's suspicious. Or why is Damian, at 2 a.m. in the morning downloading files or uploading certain documents? That's suspicious. Or why is there lateral movement from Damian's machine? Or why is Damian logging in from a geography he shouldn't be at? Or why is he logging in twice within, a matter of 2 minutes? It's all of that stuff that's getting actively monitored and trapped. And time again, we have saved our clients from some very major disasters, right? And so we saved them from being in the headline news because of that. So I always say it's not a question of when, it's a question of, when, that happens. It's not if anymore, because we know the human element is the most vulnerable element, right, in compromise, in threats. And so getting our clients protected with that additional, what we call Nexus 360 XDR offering, right, which is that eyes on glass, 24/7, actively monitored by our own trained security analysts, right, with our SOPs, with a high level of automation built into you really compress the interval from detection to remediation. That's the value, right? And so being able to say, tell me who's at the intersection of all three of these, right? And that's really our true competition. It's not to say that, look, regional MSPs that may have a relationship with the managing partner don't pose a threat. They always do. And relationships, it's a relationship world, right? But, that aside, we try and kind of focus on the value creation aspect and our ability to then not just play at the intersection of those three, but then deliver a great experience for our clients and go above and beyond in both small and big ways.
So different vernacular, but it's kind of what I would call, like, it's not a single niche. It's what I would call a triple niche, right? And you've chosen, for example, a CPA vertical. You've chosen to operationalize all of that with your expertise in Azure and public cloud and have all the capabilities and scripts and things that automation that delivers. And then you've gone through the tremendous expense and effort to build out your own security operations center to tie into that, which very few MSPs have been able to execute on. I guess my question is, most people want to be where you are, right? Number 11 on the most recent MSP 500 list. What do you attribute your growth to?
I would attribute our growth to great talent and focus, right? At the end of the day, look, I walked into a company that had great bones already, right? So, my job was to make sure that, there was a journey in both getting the right talent in the right seats, fostering and building great culture, making sure everyone's aligned, but more importantly, the discipline of who is our target audience, who do we go after. I always use the word focus 10 times, not 3, not 4, right? And I always say to our team, if we're saying no more than yes, then that's a sign that we're being focused. And so it was some very difficult conversations up front, right? Where every dollar matters. And you're like, nope, we're not going to take this lead that's in the retail segment. That's not core to us. We're going to stay disciplined. We're going to build muscle memory. We're just going to go service clients in our target market, in the CPA, in the healthcare, in the legal space. And even then, I'll tell you, some of the constructive kind of arguments with our team was, hey, guess what? There's this 10% CPA firm, and I know it doesn't fall into our 50 to 500 demographic. I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I know we're saying no to revenue, but discipline, right? We want to go after, our value proposition is a co-managed IT model. There's some level of IT sophistication, value economics that play into it. Right, in firms of that size. And so I think that's what I would attribute that to more than anything. And then obviously a lot of, with that focus comes the let's go educate. Let's go, let's not try and sell. Let's just kind of tell them about security and what are the things we are seeing in the market. Let's go tell them about how difficult it is to run workloads in Azure, as much as it may sound glamorous from outside, right? Let's go kind of share some of without giving the trade secrets away, let's just kind of go through our journey and help our clients understand that so that they can learn from us and, along the way, build trust.
I want to pivot for a moment. Sumeet, I'd love to learn, what's the biggest lesson you've learned over all your years in building as you said earlier, we're in the service business, we're in the people business. So what's the biggest lesson learned from that?
I think, to me, the biggest thing is investing in relationships, right? Be it clients, be it employees, right? I tend to think a lot about that. I tend to say, what do I do, right, to continue to build that relationship, to build that trust, and that's always paid off for me. It's just that investment, and because we're in a talent game, and I have gone to people's houses. I've taken a flight and gone and sat down and broken bread with someone I was trying to recruit and got to know their family. I have written, sometimes I've directed my appreciation for the employee, not to them, but to their spouse, to help them understand how much they've been a partner in that journey. So I would say it's that people side of the equation, right? Understanding how people work and tick. And I'm still learning quite a bit, right? So if I tell you, I reflect back on my listening skills of 10 years or 5 years ago to now, and, coming into the table with preconceived notions and already kind of, hey, I want to do this too. Now, truly being intellectually curious, right? And saying, how do I genuinely listen to understand, genuinely listen to really gain additional context and perspective. And I can't tell you how many times it's helped me transform disagreements into a positive rather than a toxic experience. And me 5 years ago or 8 years ago would have been nope, we're going to do this. Come on, guys. What do you mean? Why aren't you getting this? Versus trying to say, look, there's a perspective, right? Seek to understand and, seek to give others the benefit of the doubt. So I think for me, a lot of it is, continuing to develop as a leader and what's helped me. And I always encourage everyone is go find a mentor. All of us need mentors, and all of us should have people that mentor us. And my mentor, who happens to be somebody who's built great services companies, including Mindshift, his name's Paul Chisholm, and he's the one, when I took on this venture, I said, Paul, this is what I'm going through. I've got this legal vertical. It's largely languishing on the vine. It lacks leadership. He said, I got a guy, he used to lead my legal vertical. He may be of interest to you. You want me to call him? I said, absolutely. Now, that guy has become one of my best leaders. I mean, it's hard, but it's just great what he came in. I pulled him out of retirement, David. He was retiring. I was like, come on, man. It's like one more. You've got one more. And he's a great people guy, very credible. He had his own legal MSP that he sold to Mindshift, and then, just got corporatized. So at some point he said, I'm done with this and I'd rather retire. And so thanks to my mentor, I was able to connect with him, pull him into the journey early on. And 4 years later, I attribute a lot of our success to people, including him.
That's wonderful advice. If there was one thing you could do differently or over or sooner, what would that be?
I think, when I look at me early on in my career to now, right, I think fundamentally if I would pen a letter to myself, right, and this is me graduating college, I would say take risks early on. Take more risks, right? Err towards the uncomfortable. Growth always happens when you're outside your comfort zone. Growth always happens when you put yourself in, those situations. And, I still remember graduating, and we graduated at a great time. And so there was no shortage of job opportunity. And good example is PeopleSoft was just 50 employees, and Dave Duffield, the CEO and founder of PeopleSoft, came to our campus to recruit. He flew us back, and I had dinner at his house. And I'm like, "Who's PeopleSoft? The small company? Who goes, right?" And like, "Oh, this Motorola is, it's like we all had our StarTech, those, gizmos." And so like, I'll go work for Motorola. And my third month at Motorola, I'm like, what do you mean everyone's leaving at 5 p.m.? Come on, this is not the culture I want to be at. Yeah. So I would say take more risks and push yourself outside your comfort zone more often, right? The question I ask myself now is, what am I doing to push myself outside my comfort zone? And I get very concerned when I don't get a good answer. And so that's my journey in life, because I've always grown when I've felt slightly uncomfortable. And so that's a constant endeavor at a personal level, and a coaching I have for folks I work with is get uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes, that resonates a ton. Speaking of that, what would you say is your biggest challenge right now?
What I alluded to is, how do you build a cohesive culture in a largely remote working environment? Right now, the Amazons of the world can say, guess what, we're going to issue an edict that people are going to come back, and good for them. It doesn't really work for us, right?
Right.
And so I think the journey of building shared purpose, the journey of having everyone, including new hires, understand our values, connect with our values, um, create moments for them to sporadically connect, right, in a virtual environment that is analogous to the water cooler piece, and having a connection crew that's focused on, that's not me, but other people who are cultural ambassadors that are leading that change, that are driving ideas and giving them a runway to do stuff. Some work, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, let's do a virtual wine event that fell flat. Okay, it's just okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
You keep trying new ideas, and that's the journey, is to kind of continue to drive that level of employee engagement in this virtual world. I think that's the big thing. Just we're blessed with a sponsor that's continuing to invest in the business, that we're continuing to grow organically, and we have an organic plan for next year that I'm genuinely excited about. It's a lot of work, but of course, the opportunity is there, and it's about execution, and it's about focus. But the thing I think about is beyond that execution piece is the culture piece, and I want to be able to have this be a lasting thing regardless of where we end up, right? Where there's a certain culture that stands out, is distinguished, that people recognize, that people talk about. I always say my benchmark is when people go work at a different company, they look back and say, oh, we used to have this tradition, or we used to have to do this in our prior company, and refer to it in a positive manner.
That's a wonderful way to phrase that. Speaking of those things, what are you looking forward to the most right now, Sumeet?
Personally, I just climbed Kilimanjaro this summer, and it was wonderful.
Wow.
So you talk about somebody who never was exposed to hiking, and obviously there was a whole runway and prep over a good 8 months to get into that. And I'm a gym nut anyway, so it was all kind of stuff I truly enjoyed. And what I learned was having a goal in front of you like that, how I was able to really expand my personal regimen, do things. It was just fundamentally different than what I would have done, right? Going to, I live in Boston, so going to the Harvard Stadium and, doing the stadium climb, I connected with a whole world that I didn't know existed. So for me, having that goal at a personal level, and, orchestrating and operationalizing that, and, following that atomic habits, kind of playbook there has been great. And so, this year we're talking about Mont Blanc and, doing that Mont Blanc range in France. And so we'll see. There's a lot of my friends are working to put that together. I think professionally, we've got an exciting journey ahead of us as we continue to drive that organic growth. So just continuing to get better as an orchestrator, as a servant leader, in bringing talent together, in operationalizing what we need to do. And I think at the end of the day, working with our clients to shape that firm of the future, right? That firm of the future beyond cloud, will have a strong adoption of AI and the right use cases. And so we're all learning. And so that's exciting. At a personal level, I'm learning as well. I went through an 8-week course that I just wrapped up, right, on AI and how to start using AI. And I think everyone should be, the best way I always say to learn is to use, right? And so that's the opportunity, is kind of thinking about the role that MSPs need to play, should play, have a role to play, right? Have a value prop to evolve into as AI becomes more and more real in the workspace.
What are your thoughts on AI? I'm curious if you think now is the time to be walking side by side with the clients and just talking about it. Now is the time to actively be using this new technology and actually building things or servicing them and generating revenue. Is it now the time to sit on the sidelines and wait?
I think now is the time to learn. Now is the time to work with clients and have active discussions and dialogues about where they see the opportunity and, how we look at even, doing some proof of concept work like building chat agents. So I'll give you an example of a conversation we're having with a CPA firm right now. They generate engagement letters for their clients, right? So the firm's got thousands of engagement letters, right? So you could very easily, write an agent that sits up on top of those, get trained on those letters, right? And then be able to kind of create a version that's more specific to the firm, just on as simple as an engagement letter for audit or tax, and being able to do that more efficiently, right? The book that's on my desk that I'm looking forward to reading, over the holidays is this book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. And this is about how do you get the most from AI, and, I love his concept that it's really a jagged frontier is the terminology he uses, that the boundary between what AI cannot do is shifting, right? You could put the same query in and you could get a certain answer. You could put it in and you get a different answer. And guess what?
Yeah.
We're all kind of going through the evolution of large language models and our use case for them, and all of that's happening, pretty rapidly, right? So what we can do today versus, I guarantee you, what ChatGPT 5.0 or 6.0 or is going to be radically different. And so I think the innovation is always harder in, I always say, in a firm context or in a company context, but at a personal level, right? We've got to drive that innovation and say, how do we look at us and how do we incorporate that every day? And that's where the revolution happens versus, trying to say, what's that big thing? I'm like, well, how do you incorporate it in a day-to-day basis? I'm sure you're using Perplexity and, some of the other platforms as well, right? I'm certainly starting to use that a lot more. And, one of my commitments going into next year is I have a lot of thoughts and ideas. I'm like, well, let's kind of start to write more and use, some of these tools to help polish some of those ideas and concepts more actively.
A great answer. Now, seeing as you have a PE backer, I'm curious, is M&A something you see going to be a part of your growth in the near term?
Absolutely, all the time. I think it's the valuation disconnect, Damian, right? So, we're always looking at assets. We just looked at an asset right now as well, right? Part of the issue is, it's hypothetically, I'll go through it. Company comes in and says, hey, we got 6 million revenues, 2.5 million in EBITDA. Well, what's that 2.5 million? It's adjusted EBITDA right now. Unfortunately, being in this business as long as we ask very hard-nosed questions and we dissect that number. And so the reality ends up being different than, the seller perceives it to be. Somebody else comes along and takes them at face value. There's nothing I can do about that, right? So that always is the challenge. But having said that, we always look for, tuck-ins. Our job for tuck-ins becomes harder because they have to be aligned vertically to the segments we're in, right? And so they have to be net accretive to what we're trying to do. Otherwise, we always look at, hey, guess what? We could just pour more resources into sales and marketing and continue to drive a fairly aggressive growth rate that we already have. In building our presence nationally. So that's always the challenge.
What's the number one book you'd recommend?
For me, there's so many good books, right? But what I would tell you is what really changed me quite a bit, right? What I learned from, there's so many books I read and so many books there's two I would shortlist for different reasons. So one is this book that I'm currently reading right now. So that's called When You Win by Russ Laraway. And what attracted me to that book is all about building that manager community, that mid-layer community, and how do you build that cohesively? So, operating again at the intersection of direction and driving clear direction, coaching, both short-term, long-term, and career, investing in careers and thinking beyond the four walls of the company. So he's got a lot of good pragmatic advice on, that mid-level layer, right? In every company I've led, when I look at the lowest common denominator of success has been a very strong mid-level management layer. And so, that's one. I think the other book that really shaped me and sort of, one that I tried to really adopt quite a bit was the $1 Trillion Coach. I don't know if you, Bill Campbell, right? That's a book that Eric Schmidt read. Bill Campbell was this working class ex-football coach, right, with a completely non-tech background that coached some of the most influential tech leaders of my era and your era. And so, and there's so much, I never brought my emotions to work, right? And so for him, it was like, look, emotions and vulnerability is key and core to building trust. It's all about people. Acknowledging, engaging people is so key. I go to a restaurant, the first thing I would do is ask the server their name. Before they ask me, I'll say, how's your day going? If I go and check in, to an airline counter, they're not faceless people. There's a reason why they have a badge. There's a reason why the grocery cards have a badge. How many times has somebody said, hey, Dave, how's your day going? How's your shift going? How difficult is the day today? It must be really crazy with Thanksgiving, right? Acknowledging and engaging people in a genuine manner, not just perfunctory. And the more I started doing that, the more it became natural, the more it became second nature, to a point where my wife's like, oh, you can't leave Sumeet alone anywhere because he's going to start talking to anybody and everybody, right? So I've developed this other reputation, I'll tell you a funny story where in Iceland, in August with our kids vacationing, we're in the most remote part of Iceland. And I look around and, I see this other gentleman and, it's like over breakfast. My wife's like, you're having breakfast with them? No, but she knows he's going to stop by and say hello. And I say hello, and I turned out this person is from Boston as well. He his name's Yogesh Gupta. He leads Progress Software. He's a, very eminent guy here in the Boston tech circles. And he's somebody I've been meaning to connect with a long time, right? And so I'm like, what's the odds, Yogesh, that you and I connect here in this remote part of Iceland, both of us being from Boston? And so I think just, for me, that book has really shaped a lot of how I look at life, how I lead, and so it's just trying to put a lot of those in practice. And then, for me, feedback. So I always seek feedback. What am I not doing? Where are my blind spots? And so I use this construct of stop, start, continue, which is with all my leaders. I'll sit down every few months and say, what am I not doing, right, that I should start doing? So that's the start piece. What am I doing that's not helping our cause that I should stop?
Yeah,
and the continue is, what am I doing that is working that I shouldn't lose sight of?
Yeah. That second question is a hard one to come around to. It was for me. I love the framework there, Sumeet. How do you just seem so hungry. You seem so driven. Like how do you keep that hunger over the decades you've been at this in different service providers?
I think that, there's a genuine inner, I'll tell you where my energy and stimulation comes from is from people, right? And so that's the struggles I have in this environment of remote, is not always being surrounded by people. But I love this business of bringing smart, intellectually driven people together and aligning them to a purpose and a mission. And so that piece, it's like, there's not a conversation with my CFO. There's not a conversation with any of my leaders where I don't walk away learning something. And so that to me is the piece, right? Is I would say it's a people business, and I get stimulated by having smart people around me.
Sumeet, this has been amazing. Can you tell folks, if they want to reach out or connect with you, how they can find you online?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn is always great. I respond to all of the requests I get on LinkedIn, and you can always email me at sumeet@netgaincloud.com. So my first name at netgaincloud.com.
This has been a really huge gift. I've learned so much. Thank you for being on MSP Mindset, Sumeet.
Thank you so much, Damian. And I truly am a big fan of yours, and I say this in the most sincere manner. And I'm looking forward to all of the interviews you're going to do as well. And I truly wish you a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully you're able to truly disconnect and spend some meaningful quality time and create some new memories.
I appreciate that. Thank you.